Hello and welcome to this discussion of other cases of correspondence. The topic of corresponding squares, as we have touched on already, is a wide-ranging one. Situations can be anywhere between elementary and so complex that most squares on the board turn out to be squares of reciprocal Zugzwang. How then do we determine whether squares correspond? Unfortunately, there's no exact formula. The sensible way involves examining the possible plans for both sides, finding the key squares, and calculating the simple variations. By subjecting the position to this preliminary analysis, we might discover reciprocal Zugzwang situations and thence proceed to define entire networks of corresponding squares. With this study from Grigoriev, we will see how such a process takes place. Black is to move here and seems to be in some trouble. White has an extra protected pass pawn on d3. Indeed, if white manages to occupy the e2 square, he will be able to play d4 and king d3, and simply take this pawn on c3, and thus win the game. So e2 is a key square. Black can't let white onto that one. And we can also notice that if white is able to occupy f2, then that will mean that there's no way black can prevent white from getting to e2 on the next move. So f2 is also a key square. Black needs to keep white from these two squares, or he will surely lose. At present, black can do this by playing either king e3 or king f3. King e3 takes the opposition, so it seems the more natural move. However, let's see if there's anything else we can find out first. Without being able to access either of these two key squares, white will surely try to come around the other way, via a2 to b3 to, again, take the c3 pawn. So if we can imagine the white king getting to a2, black will need to stop it from getting to b3. Now, there are only two squares from which black can actually do that, and those two squares are b4 and a4. However, the a4 square would actually leave black's king too far away from the king side, because let's imagine with the kings here, like white plays king b1, king b4, king c1, king c5, king d1, king d4, well, white can access the e2 square. And this we know is a key square, so white would win the game. And so the black king has to instead be on b4 in order to give it enough time to come back to the king side if needed. So thus we can determine that a2 and b4 correspond to each other. But it doesn't stop there. As we can see, white's only got one pathway to get here, and so does black. So that means that b1 and c5 must also correspond, as do c1 and d4, d1 and e3, and e1 and f3. So this means that in fact the natural move king e3 would lose, because after king d1, black can't play the move king d4 due to king e2, and any other move, let's say king f3, will leave the black king too far away from the queen side, and white will be able to invade via b3. For example, king c1, king e3, king b1, king a2, king d4, king a2, king c5, and king b3, king d4, king b4, and white will win the c3 pawn. By the way, if king d2 here, well then simply d4 and the pawn will queen. This position shows us that a system of corresponding squares does not have to be a straight line, as with the opposition. Each case demands concrete analysis. It also reminds us that we should not take the opposition automatically, but rather first be sure that doing so places our opponent in Zugzwang. Dvoretsky calls such cases as this, where we'd rather give the move away to the opponent, the anti-opposition. So here the move is king f3. And this looks very unnatural because it's allowing whites to gain the opposition with either king f1 or king d1. But after king d1, king e3, it's actually white who's in Zugzwang, because after, for example, king e1, we can simply go back to f3. We've established that we've already seen this position. And if king c1, now black's in time to get round to b4, king d4, king b1, king c5, king a2, and king b4. Let's see another example from a real game, Gulkal versus Shores. Again, white is down a pawn, but it's an h-pawn, so there may be some drawing scenarios if we can exchange off the other pair of pawns, right? Unfortunately, it turns out that the immediate attempt to do this by playing king f4 doesn't quite work. After king f4, king e7, king f5, king f7, you can play the move e4, but then black simply plays h4, and if we try to stop this pawn, which we have to do because otherwise it will simply queen, by playing king g4, black will be in time to pick up this white pawn on e4 after king h4, king e5. And when black does this, it's our old friend key squares. The black king will occupy the e4 square, which is a key square of the f6 pawn. In fact, even with white to move in the position after we've played e4 and we rush to play e5, it's still not enough to draw, because after h4, again, we'd have to play king g4, stop the pawn, and king h4, and f takes e5, king h4, king e6, and the black king will get round to put in time to put us in opposition and gain access to one of these three key squares. We can see that here with king g3, d5, king f3, king d4 threatening to come here, so king e2, but then king e4 with the opposition, and black gains access to one of these three key squares. Okay, so, but let's just notice one thing. In this position, if the black king was instead on e7 or on g7, we would be able to take on f6 with check. And that would enable us to play king g4. That would give us the extra time to play king g4 whilst also having exchanged off this pawn. And that would be enough to draw the game. Okay, so let's go back to the start. So what can we do about the black king coming to the center? The only viable plan is to attack the h-pawn. If king e6 could be met by king h4, white would be able to draw. The black king can't attack e3 and also defend f6. Notice that before, after we played e4, it's a shorter path for the black king to come and take this pawn. Whereas if it's on e3, then we'll be able to take h5 and we'll be in time to attack the pawn on f6. So what's black's other plan? Well, black can try and come in via g6 instead. And here we'd need to be able to play king f4 to stop the king from going to f5 or g5. Now notice we haven't actually identified any key squares yet. because these aren't necessarily Zugzwang situations. However, the facts we have uncovered enable us to begin the search for correspondences. From f7, black can go to either e6 or to g6. White must therefore be able to go to either h4 or f4, depending on which way black goes. And we can notice that there's only one square that enables white to go to both of these squares, and that's the g3 square. So that means that f7 and g3 do correspond. And that means we can't play king g3 here because of king f7, and we'll have to give up on one of these two plans. Also, king f2 is bad because after the move king e7, black is threatening to play king e6, and we need to be able to meet that with king h4. And the only way we can be able to play king h4 on the next move is to play king g3, but that would enable black to put us in Zugzwang with the move king f7. And so this leads us to the kind of astonishing conclusion that in the initial position, we need to play the move king g2. Because this enables us to go to, this still enables us to go to g3 if, for example, king f7 is played. But it also allows us to go to h3. So, for example, they repeated the position a couple of times, once here, and then short played the move king e7, but now king h3. So now we can still meet king e6 with king h4, but we haven't done it through the g3 square. So that's only left king f7, but after king g3, we're perfectly well placed to meet both of black's plans, king e6 and king g6. King g6 was chosen by short, but then after king f4, king h6, king f5, there's simply no more plans for black. Short played king h7, e4, king h6, and after king takes f6, the game was agreed drawn because both pawns were promoted at the same time. If it was white's move here, obviously might have been time to give checkmate, but black can give some checks first and draw the game. So if we go back to this position here, king e6, we met by king h4, and we've discussed this. The black king is, because the pawn's not on e4, this is drawn, the black king will take too long to gobble up the e3 pawn. Another black try could have been f5, but we can in fact meet this with the simple e4, and this will be also drawn because even though black temporarily goes up 2 pawns, white will play king f4, and example king g6, king e4. This is a very trivial draw, king g5, king f3, and we'll get back into the corner, so there's nothing that black can even try in this position. And curiously enough, this position had already appeared as a study composed by Costantini in 1979. Gilko hadn't seen this, but by applying the concept of corresponding squares, he was able to solve the position and to save the game. Thanks so much for joining me for this last discussion of corresponding squares. We will next move on to the rule of the square. Goodbye for now.